Hi, you're on the This Is Crime channel. I'm Matilda. Listen to my new story. David Berkowitz, the .44 caliber killer. David Berkowitz, better known as Son of Sam, is a fairly typical average serial killer. He can even be considered relatively normal compared to his fellow bloody craft, such as, for example, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ed Gein, or Bob Birdella, whose chilling crimes and horrific tendencies make a normal person shudder with horror and disgust. However, Berkowitz was no less famous than the horror and disgust-inducing necrophiles and cannibals. Berkowitz hunted mainly for couples who spent time in parked cars in secluded places. Son of Sam terrorized New York City for more than a year, since the summer of 1976, and the police were literally knocked off their feet, searching for the criminal, terrorizing the citizens of the city. The media, publishing his letters, also contributed to the Berkowitz case, pushing him to new crimes and sowing panic among the citizens. An operational headquarters was created to search for the criminal under the code name Operation Omega. 200 detectives were involved in the search for the maniac, not to mention the fact that the authorities, and consequently taxpayers, were spending almost $100,000 a day to find him. Berkowitz became known mainly for his letters that he sent to the police and the media. In his letters, he explained his reasons for going on manhunts and killing couples in autos or random passers-by. And these explanations seemed to be the ravings of a madman, the fabrications of a disturbed mind. The neighbor's dog, General Jack Cosmo, these creatures of a sick mind ordered him to kill, guided Berkowitz to the path of truth. What made him so? What was the true cause of the transformation of a lonely and neglected by all teenager in a serial killer? Why he wrote such strange messages became clear only after a long time. The birth of a sick mind. David Berkowitz was born on June 1, 1953, and his mother, 19-year-old Betty Broder, gave him up for adoption. David was the product of an illicit love affair, and the young woman was forced to give up the child. The boy was adopted by a childless married couple, Nathan and Pearl Berkowitz. The family lived in the Bronx. The adoptive parents did not dote on little David. He was their only joy. His parents led a rather withdrawn lifestyle, preferring evenings in the family circle, noisy entertainment, and active recreation, which is so fond of many New Yorkers. David grew up the same child, homely, withdrawn, seeking solitude. Over time, he became acutely aware of his rejection, feeling shunned and neglected. He was a foster child, he was adopted, and he believed that this was what it was all about. Or rather, he had indoctrinated himself into it, even though his parents adored their only son. His relationships with his peers were not the best. David was much taller and larger than his peers. In addition, it cannot be said that he had a disposable appearance. Soon, he acquired a reputation as a bully and a bully. At school, his progress was mediocre. None of the subjects of the school program did not arouse much interest in him, except for sports. He learned to play baseball quite decently, which in no small measure contributed to his size. And soon baseball became his main hobby. He was haunted by the thought that he had been the cause of his mother's death. David was sure that she had died in childbirth, giving him life. Guilt tormented him incessantly, manifesting itself in irritability, unreasonable anger. It demanded an outlet. And later psychiatric experts who studied him concluded that this was one of the reasons for his antisocial and aggressive behavior in childhood and adolescence. He was always drawn to fire, a symbol of destruction. His morbid attraction to fire manifested itself in hooliganism. He set fire to empty houses and garbage dumps. Incomprehensible to himself tension, irritation against others required an outlet, and he found it in arson. He even kept a special notebook where he wrote down what he did, how and when, returning, in this way, to the feelings he experienced at that moment. While studying at school, his relationship with the opposite sex did not work out, and at a time when his peers set dates with girls or organized noisy and fun parties, he was alone, feeling unattached and unneeded. Another blow. In 1967, his adoptive mother, Pearl Berkowitz, died of breast cancer. Her death was a terrible blow to David. He felt a terrible emptiness inside, as if he'd lost a part of himself. Loneliness, terrible weight pressed on him. He could not find a place for himself from grief, considering the death of his mother an insidious plot of some unknown forces, designed to destroy him and himself. The devil's plot was designed to destroy him as a person. He became severely depressed. His already modest success in school was replaced by failures in his studies. His loneliness, alienation from others, only aggravated the situation. David's father, 5 years after Pearl Berkowitz's death, remarried. Stepmother did not particularly try to establish relations with David, and he reciprocated her. Soon, he was left all alone. Newlyweds moved to Florida, leaving 18-year-old David alone in a huge city. He actually found himself in complete isolation, without family, relatives, without the support of relatives, and now he had to rely on himself for everything. After his father and stepmother left for Florida, David decided to join the army. 3 hard years in Korea did not pass without a trace for his psyche, and, as later noted by experts who conducted a psychiatric examination, Berkowitz, service in the army affected him most destructive way. He became addicted to alcohol and drugs, tried sex with a prostitute, and as a result got a venereal disease. It was his first sexual experience that ended in such a sad way. All this could not but form in him a very special attitude towards women. In the army, he renounced the faith of his ancestors, Judaism, by being baptized and converted to Christianity, and even tried to preach. But his tossing, his attempts to escape his loneliness by finding a foothold in his faith, ended most miserably. His father condemned him, and their already difficult relationship became even more strained. Returning home to New York after 3 years of service, David settled back in the Bronx and tried to find his birth mother. He learned that she was alive, and indeed he tracked her down, and after all these years, the family was reunited. For a while, David visited his mother often, visiting his sister, who by this time had her own family. Soon, however, the visits became more and more infrequent, and then stopped altogether. He was tormented by the thought that he was an unwanted child, that his own mother had rejected him, abandoning him at birth. He lived in terrible loneliness, feeling rejected by everyone, unwanted and abandoned. He began to be overcome by morbid fantasies. Day and night paranoid visions haunted him, not leaving him for a minute. The night before Christmas, 1975, to appease the demons that had taken control of his soul and mind, Berkowitz attacked 2 women with a knife. One of his victims was never identified. The other, 15-year-old Michelle Foreman, suffered 6 stab wounds. Fortunately, she managed to survive. The Devil's Handmaidens. Soon after the unsuccessful attacks, Berkowitz decides he needs a more serious weapon than a hunting knife and buys a .44 caliber revolver. He moves from the Bronx to Yonkers and settles into a house owned by a quiet married couple. Insomnia, restlessness, and anxiety overwhelm David, and at night the howling and barking of the neighbors' dogs becomes a real torture for him. His distraught psyche perceives these sounds as messages from demons ordering him to go kill. He would later tell psychiatrists that in an attempt to appease the demons tormenting his distraught mind, he followed their commands and began to do what they wanted him to do: kill. The quiet married couple who own the house where Berkowitz has taken up residence, Jack and Nan Cassara, over time become, in his eyes, part of a diabolical plot to destroy him. He assigns Jack the rank of general, and the latter becomes General Jack Cosmo, Commander-in-Chief of the Devil Dogs. After a while, Berkowitz moves and settles in a small apartment on Pine Street. But to hide from the demons that control his mind, feelings, thoughts, and actions, he cannot succeed. In the new place, he is waiting for an even more serious challenge. His neighbor Sam Carr had a black Labrador, which, as David believed, was a tool in the hands of the devil himself. David eventually shot the dog, but it didn't bring him relief. The demons that had taken possession of the other howling and barking dogs did not disappear. Sam Carr himself, as Berkowitz believed, was at the mercy of the most powerful devil in existence, perhaps Satan himself. And the devil's handmaidens, the howling dogs, still kept David awake at night just as much. They howled and gnashed their teeth, demanding blood. Their messages were unmistakable. He must go out to kill. And to quench their terrible bloodlust, he had to kill again and again. I only wanted to kill. On July 29, 1976, Berkowitz, armed with a .44 caliber revolver, attacks two female friends sitting in a parked car outside the home of one of them. Donna Loria, 18, died almost immediately from a gunshot wound to the neck. Jody Valente, 19, was shot in the thigh. She survived and was able to give police a description of the man who shot at them. Berkowitz carried a gun in a paper bag and fired typically 5 shots. Later, during the investigation, Berkowitz would say that he did not want to harm his victims. He only wanted to kill. Berkowitz's next targets were Carl Denaro, 20, and Rosemary Keenan, 18. Berkowitz attacked them on October 23, 1976, as the couple sat in Carl's parked car. He again fired 5 times, but fortunately for the young people, unsuccessfully. Rosemary was unhurt, and Carl was lightly wounded. A month later, on November 26, 1976, he shot, again 5 times, at 2 female friends returning home from a movie after an evening session. Donna Damasi, 16, was wounded, but fortunately not seriously. Her friend, Joanna Lamino, 18, was severely injured and left paralyzed for the rest of her life with no hope of recovery. Police, who found striking similarities in the 2 armed attacks, July 29th and November 26th, linked the crimes. But the investigation progressed slowly. Attacks committed for no apparent reason at night, when it is difficult, if not impossible, to see a stranger. The difficulties faced by detectives were obvious, but they were expected by the relatives of the victims, inconsolable parents, and the authorities, demanding to solve the crimes as soon as possible. Berkowitz's next victims were Christine Freund, 26, and her fiancé John Deal, 30. They were shot with a revolver by a male stranger as they sat in a parked car. The attack occurred on January 30th, 1977. John survived, and Christine, who was severely wounded in the head, died in the hospital. On March 8, 1977, Berkowitz shot and killed 19-year-old Barnard College student Virginia Voskerikian in the street. It happened in Queens, and it happened in the evening, at 8:30, when the girl, returning from classes, overtook a passerby on the street. To her misfortune, the passerby was a maniac, armed with a revolver .44 caliber. On April 14, 1977, by order of the authorities, a special unit was created to catch the criminal, called Killer .44 caliber. The unit, called Operation Omega, which consisted of 200 detectives, was tasked with finding the killer until the next victims came forward. On April 17th, the city was literally shaken by the news of a new double murder committed by an elusive maniac. He again shot through a car window at young people sitting in a parked car. Valentina Suriani, 18, was shot twice in the head and died on the spot. Her friend Alexander Iso, 20, died in hospital from head wounds. At the scene of the killing, which took place in the Bronx, Berkowitz left a letter for police signed Son of Sam. It was addressed to the head of the special unit handling the .44 caliber killer case. In late April, a journalist working for the New York Daily News also received a letter from an unknown perpetrator, which was published in the newspaper the very next day. In the letter of strange content, the maniac claimed that he adored his work, and Sam, whom he wants to please so much, will not let him stop until he is drunk on blood. The message suggested that it was written by a mentally ill person. Reports of murders, reports from the scene of crime, screaming headlines in newspapers, strange messages of a maniac. All this caused a real panic in the city. The townspeople, not hoping for protection from the guards of order, organized volunteer vigilantes. Frightened New Yorkers, for a little, almost held a lynch trial over a Brooklyn hooligan armed with a large caliber revolver, mistaking him for an elusive maniac. And the attacks continued. On June 26, 1977, the killer again shot young people sitting in a car after a disco party ended. Judy Placido, 17, and Salvatore Lupu, 20, were wounded but survived. The latest attack. It must be said that the media developed an active activity around these tragic events. Seeking to capitalize on a new sensation, even before the elusive maniac was caught, they became his actual accomplices. Shortly before the anniversary of Berkowitz's first crime, the press speculated that another murder would take place on that very day. Such irresponsible statements on the pages of newspapers looked like direct incitement, all the more so when one could reasonably assume that the maniac seeks fame, revels in his fame, attention to his person. And it is quite likely that it was this kind of statements that pushed the criminal to another murder. Such assumptions are confirmed by the fact that after the arrest of the maniac in his apartment was found a lot of newspaper and magazine clippings telling about his crimes and victims. On the eve of the anniversary of Berkowitz's first murder, the police were put on full alert. The day of July 29th and then July 30th, 1977 passed quietly. The son of Sam did not make himself known in any way. But on July 31st, 1977, a new armed attack was carried out, again on a couple of young men, again in the same recognizable manner that had become a kind of calling card of the son of Sam. A pair of young people, Bobby Violante, 20, and Stacy Moskowitz, 20, after attending an evening session at a movie theater in Brooklyn, walked around a park and got into a car. A maniac shot at them through the car window. Bobby became nearly blind after his wounds, and Stacy died in the hospital from head wounds. The police, who were unable to prevent the crime, predicted in advance by the press, used all their available forces and all possibilities to finally catch the criminal who intimidated the city. A huge number of owners of large-caliber weapons were checked. More than 20,000 people. In the case were about 3,000 suspects. Working under massive pressure from all sides day and night, detectives combed the places of possible appearance of the killer. The investigation was complicated by the fact that witnesses and surviving victims gave completely different descriptions of the criminal. At different stages of the search for the criminal, the police even involved several telepaths in the investigation. One of them, a very famous American telepath of his time, Uri Geller, took part in the search after the last murder on July 31, 1977. His friend introduced him to a police officer who was trying to take every opportunity just to catch a horrible maniac. In his book, Geller recounted how they drove late one night to the scene of Son of Sam's latest crime in a deserted spot called Lover's Alley near the Vernadano Bridge. Geller, who had previously been shown pictures of the killer's victims, unfortunate young girls, was willing to do his best to help the investigation. At the crime scene, he walked around, concentrated, trying to feel what had happened as best he could, and then began to describe the perpetrator to the police officer and named his place of residence as Yonkers. As he claimed, it later turned out that the information he had given was accurate. Geller also revealed that one of the telepaths was able to provide additional information which, together with his information about the maniac, put an end to Son of Sam's criminal activities. After such a long time, it is difficult to state whose efforts led to the capture of the maniac who preyed on couples of young men in the first place. Apparently, the efforts of the 200 detectives involved in catching the culprit were not wasted, and neither were the funds that were spent on the investigation. Eventually, the police were able to get on the trail of the criminal. He was figured out, thanks to a seemingly insignificant circumstance. The police, who had checked all the cars that had parked and received parking tickets in the area of the latest crime during or shortly before the attack on Violante and Moskowitz, came upon Berkowitz's trail. That evidence, along with those letters he wrote to Jack and Nan Cassara, Sam Carr, his military background, and a number of other circumstances uncovered along the way, led police to the prime suspect. Upon arrest, Berkowitz did not lock himself away and confessed to being the wanted Son of Sam. At the same time, he claimed that his neighbor Sam Carr, through his dog, had given the orders to kill him. But, as Berkowitz claimed, this dog only looked like a dog, but in fact it was not a dog at all, but a creature that gave him the idea of where he needed to go. And as soon as he received such a signal, he would go to kill, but he did not know who would be his victim. He recognized his victims intuitively. The psychiatric experts who conducted a psychiatric evaluation of Berkowitz issued an opinion on the possibility of his participation in the court procedure. During the trial, Berkowitz pleaded not guilty. The court, however, found all charges against Berkowitz proven and entered a guilty verdict. David Berkowitz was sentenced to prison and received a cumulative sentence of 365 years in prison. In 1979, during an interview with FBI Special Agent Robert Ressler, Berkowitz admitted that the Son of Sam stories were made up. If caught, he hoped to convince the court of his insanity in this way. Berkowitz spoke of the real reasons that drove him to the murders: anger and irritation against his mother, who had abandoned him at birth, and his failures in relationships with women. Berkowitz talked about the fact that killing women acted on him in a sexually arousing way. It may be added that in prison in Attica, Berkowitz proved himself to be a model prisoner. He found solace in his faith and not only wrote a literary work about his conversion to Christ, but also became a preacher of Christianity. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel and put a thumbs up. Look forward to more stories from the team of our channel. This is Criminal.